I left my family after my family wanted to break up with my boyfriend so that I could date my dad's friend's son. My name is Eudora, and for nearly 2 years, I've been in a relationship with my boyfriend, Barnaby. We first crossed paths at a mutual friend's weekly trivia night, a relaxed gathering where everyone contributed snacks from the local discount store and engaged in friendly competition over obscure facts. Our connection was immediate, and our bond has only deepened since. My family holds traditional values, though not in the affluent sense of country clubs or vacation homes. My father, Clarence, dedicates long hours to his job, while my mother, Mildred, is adept at stretching every dollar to maintain our household. Their philosophy has always been, family comes first, which, in practice, often translates to, whatever father decides is best. Barnaby and I have maintained a low profile regarding our relationship within my family circle. We haven't concealed it, but we've also avoided drawing attention to it. Barnaby has attended several family events, always bringing flowers for my mother, which she places in the kitchen rather than the more prominent living room. He makes earnest attempts to discuss sports with my father, who typically responds with non-committal grunts. Last Sunday, I arrived for our customary family dinner, anticipating the usual routine. Mother was preparing her renowned meatloaf, a dish she ingeniously extends to last several days. Father was engrossed in a television program, and my younger sister, Dorcas, was absorbed in her phone. However, I noticed additional place settings at the table, indicating extra guests. Who else is joining us? I inquired while assisting Mother with the salad. Oh, Harold and his son, Virgil, will be here shortly, she replied. Harold is Father's longtime friend and business associate. His son, Virgil, is a 27-year-old who also works with them. My interactions with Virgil have been minimal, I know little beyond these basic facts. Dinner commenced in the usual fashion. Harold arrived with Virgil, who wore a crisp button-up shirt that still bore the creases from its packaging. Mother served him the choicest portions, casting me subtle, meaningful glances throughout the meal. Dorcas repeatedly nudged me under the table, her eyes wide with unspoken implications. Between the meatloaf and dessert, a modest store-bought cake, Father cleared his throat, a prelude to significant announcements in our household. Eudora, he began, Harold and I have been discussing an important matter. An uneasy sensation settled in my stomach, a premonition of unwelcome news. Virgil is at a point where he's ready to settle down, Father continued. Harold interjected, beaming, we thought it would be ideal for our families to unite through marriage. I nearly choked on my water. What? I managed to articulate. It makes perfect sense, Father asserted, avoiding direct eye contact. Harold and I are expanding the business, and Virgil will eventually assume his father's role. A marriage between you two would solidify our partnership. I sat in stunned silence, my fork suspended midway to my mouth. Virgil focused intently on his plate, appearing as uncomfortable as I felt. I'm dating Barnaby, I stated, though everyone at the table was already aware. Mother dismissed my comment with a wave of her hand. Oh, dear, that's just a youthful infatuation. We're considering your future. Your mother's right, Father added. Barnaby is a nice young man, but he lacks the prospects that Virgil offers. This marriage is about securing our family's future. I glanced at Virgil, who remained silent, his attention fixed on his dessert. Harold grinned, evidently pleased with the arrangement, while my parents looked at me expectantly. This is absurd, I said firmly. I have no intention of marrying Virgil. I love Barnaby. Father's complexion darkened slightly, a sign of his mounting frustration. This isn't about love, Eudora. It's about family and our collective future. Feeling overwhelmed, I stood up. I need some air, I muttered, heading for the door. As I departed, I heard Father call after me, you have until the end of the month to end things with that boy. We're announcing the engagement at Harold's anniversary celebration. I didn't respond. I grabbed my coat and left, my mind racing. Barnaby was waiting in his car around the corner. We had planned to go shopping after dinner to pick up some essentials for his apartment. I got into the car, my hands trembling as I fastened my seatbelt. That was yesterday. Today, my phone has been inundated with messages from Mother, urging me to be reasonable and consider the family's well-being. Dorcas sent a series of bewildered texts, followed by warnings that Father is serious about this arrangement. Even my cousin, Opal, called to inquire about the situation. Barnaby and I spent last night in his modest studio apartment, discussing our options. We had been planning to move in together when his lease expired next month, nothing extravagant, just a small two-bedroom unit in the same complex where our friend, Felix, resides. We had been quietly saving and preparing for this next step. Despite the pressure from my family, Barnaby and I began quietly accelerating our move-in plans. We knew staying quiet wouldn't buy us time anymore. It was no longer about simply being together, it was about making sure we had control over our future. The day after that dreadful dinner, I returned to my parents' house when I knew they'd be at work. I planned to gather a few essentials. It was supposed to be a quick in-and-out trip. What I didn't anticipate was Dorcas being home from college with a mild fever and a sore throat. She was surprised to see me but didn't ask questions right away. As I packed up a duffel bag with clothes, documents, and the worn copy of Pride and Prejudice my grandmother had given me, Dorcas sat cross-legged on the bed, observing me like I was a rare bird preparing to migrate. "They've been calling everyone," she finally said. "Aunt Maybelle. Even Cousin Raymond in Idaho. They're saying you're being influenced, that this is all because of Barnaby." I sighed. "It's not because of Barnaby. It's because they're trying to barter my life away." That's when she told me everything, how the situation wasn't just about values or tradition. The business had been struggling for a while. Dad and Harold were trying to merge their operations and needed to present a united front. A family merger through marriage was a symbolic gesture meant to secure new contracts, impress potential investors, and reassure their clients that things were stable and legacy-driven. "They already put money down on a venue," Dorcas said quietly. "A lot of money. Non-refundable." My head spun. "Wait, they paid for an engagement party already?" She nodded. "They booked it under Harold's anniversary. But Mom's been telling people it's your engagement dinner." I leaned against the closet door, the familiar ache of pressure building in my chest. "How long have they been planning this?" "I don't know. Months maybe." I felt sick. Dorcas handed me a small photo album I hadn't seen in years, pictures of me as a child, always dressed up for events, always smiling. Tucked inside the cover was a note in Mom's handwriting, "For Eudora's big day, someday soon." There was a deposit slip inside as well, labeled Wedding Fund. "They've been saving for this since you were little," Dorcas added softly. "But I don't think it's really about the wedding." No. It was about saving something else. That night, Barnaby and I sat on the floor of his studio apartment, surrounded by piles of laundry and 3 half-eaten takeout containers. He held my hand while I read through a message my cousin Opal sent. She had visited my parents that afternoon and said Mom had been crying in the living room while Dad sat in silence. "She keeps saying you're ruining everything," the message read. "And your dad keeps muttering about contracts and losing everything." We spent hours that evening going over our finances. Barnaby's car had just failed inspection and needed more work than it was worth. My hours at work had been quietly cut back, and while no one said it was related, I couldn't ignore the fact that my manager took a call from my mom just 2 days earlier. The apartment we'd applied for had slipped through our fingers when the landlord decided to rent to his nephew instead. Every rental we found online was either out of our price range or already taken. Barnaby's friend Felix had offered to let us crash in his converted garage for a few weeks, but we knew it wouldn't be a long-term solution. To make things worse, the pressure from my extended family was building. My phone buzzed constantly, texts, voicemails, Facebook tags. Aunt Dorothy even left a comment under one of my old photos: "When did young people stop caring about family honor?" I muted most of them, but the notifications still lit up my screen. I told Barnaby we needed to figure something out, soon. He looked at me with that familiar calmness he always carried when I felt overwhelmed. "What if we don't wait?" "Wait for what?" "To get married." I stared at him. "You mean now? With everything going on?" He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "It won't fix everything, but maybe it'll give us a little peace. And honestly, I'd marry you in a cardboard box." I laughed, then cried. He held me while I did both. We set a date for the following Tuesday. Not for any romantic reason, just that we both had the day off, and the courthouse had an available slot. Felix agreed to be our witness and help cover the rideshare fare, since Barnaby's car was still out of commission. I ordered a simple white dress online for $32. It arrived in a plastic bag, wrinkled and 2 sizes too big. Barnaby wore his only dress shirt. We split a cab to the courthouse, telling the driver we had a legal thing to attend. Inside, the clerk processed our paperwork while eating her lunch. A man in the corner kept loudly filling out jury duty forms. The ceremony took 10 minutes. No music. No guests. Just me, Barnaby, and a municipal employee with a sandwich in one hand and a stamp in the other. Felix took a few photos. Most were blurry, but one caught the two of us laughing right after I nearly dropped the $11 ring we picked up at a discount shop. We celebrated by splitting a plate of fries at the diner across the street. The waitress gave us a free slice of pie when she found out we'd just gotten married. Barnaby held my hand the entire time. When we got back to the motel, our temporary honeymoon suite, I posted one of the clearer wedding photos online. Just a caption that read, "We did a thing." Within minutes, the first comments rolled in. Opal posted a string of heart emojis. Dorcas called, sniffling through her laughter and asking if it was real. Then came the fallout. Mother saw the post while she was out shopping. She called me sobbing in the parking lot, saying I'd humiliated the family and ruined all their careful planning. A store attendant offered her tissues, thinking something far worse had happened. Dad didn't call me, but Dorcas said he hurled his phone across the room when he saw the picture. Harold reportedly drove straight to our house to talk some sense into my father. Virgil, to everyone's surprise, liked the post and even commented, "Congratulations." Which, needless to say, did not go over well with Harold. The rest of the family was split. Some sent cautious congratulations in private. Others flooded my inbox with disappointment and stories of how they did things the right way. One cousin tagged me in a video called "The Downfall of Family Values." We stayed in that little motel room, eating discount pizza and watching late-night home improvement shows on Barnaby's phone. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old cigarettes. The Wi-Fi was spotty. The ceiling had a water stain in the shape of a rabbit. But it was our first home. Our marriage might not have had a chandelier or violin music, but it had love and intention. And in that tiny motel room, with a blanket wrapped around our shoulders and leftover fries on the nightstand, we knew we had chosen something real. It had been nearly a week since we got married. We were still living in the same $45 a night motel, which we chose because it accepted cash and didn't ask too many questions. The room was small and poorly lit, but it was warm and private, and in this whirlwind of chaos, that was enough. We were waiting to hear back from the leasing office of a small one-bedroom apartment in the older part of town. It had outdated wallpaper and no dishwasher, but it was within budget and had a tiny patch of grass outside. We hoped it would be ours soon. In the meantime, I picked up a few more shifts at the shop where I worked. My hours had quietly been cut after my mom made her dramatic phone call to the manager, but a coworker took sick, so I offered to cover. Barnaby started doing grocery deliveries to make ends meet. We lived on ramen, canned soup, and occasional diner leftovers. Then came the rainstorm. My sister Dorcas called in a panic. The basement at my parents' house was flooding, and she was alone. Mom and Dad were at a church event, and she needed help fast. Barnaby and I grabbed what we could, mostly old towels and a bucket, and drove over. It was strange to be back there, in the house where I grew up. Stranger still to be crouched in the basement, lifting soggy cardboard boxes onto shelves while water crept up the walls. It was while moving one of the older boxes, one labeled simply, "Office," that a metal filing cabinet tipped over and burst open. Papers spilled everywhere. Most were water-stained, and some were beyond saving. But a few, sealed in a plastic folder, remained intact. Inside were documents I was never meant to see. At first, I thought they were just ordinary business records. But as I looked closer, my stomach turned. Loan agreements. Dozens of them. Each one bore Harold's signature and my father's as the guarantor. The dates stretched back more than a decade, small amounts at first, then larger ones as the years progressed. The most recent loan had been signed just weeks before that Sunday dinner, the night they tried to propose my future away. Some documents had "Final Notice" stamped in red ink. Others were payment schedules that showed multiple missed deadlines. Dorcas peeked over my shoulder. "What is that?" I flipped to the next sheet, a letter from a development group. They were interested in buying out the family business, but only if both my father's and Harold's operations were sold together as a unit. Then came the clause that explained everything: potential acquisition contingent on clear succession planning and a unified family structure to maintain legacy branding. I suddenly understood. The proposed marriage wasn't just symbolic, it was leverage. To them, I wasn't a daughter or a person. I was the keystone in a collapsing bridge. A solution to years of poor business decisions. A guarantee that the company could stay intact long enough to sell. As I stood there, soaking wet, papers in hand, I realized something: my entire life had been part of a contingency plan. Dorcas, who hadn't said a word for several minutes, finally whispered, they were going to lose everything. She found another envelope, tucked behind the drawer. Inside were receipts for personal loans, my father borrowing money from friends, selling off old equipment, even cashing out a portion of his retirement fund. And in one corner, a handwritten note. Meet with Harold next Thursday, discuss final proposal. Dorcas sat down on the stairs, holding her head. I took photos of everything I could before the papers got too wet to salvage. Later that night, I sent them all to Virgil. He deserved to know just how deep his father's involvement was. His response came a few hours later: well, that explains the sudden urgency. Thank you. The fallout began almost immediately. Opal showed up at our motel with a paper bag full of snacks and a half-used candle. She hugged me without saying much and stayed for 2 hours, quietly helping us organize the tiny room. Before leaving, she leaned in and whispered, Warren's wife found out about the second mortgage. She moved in with her sister. Within 2 days, Warren had moved out. Word spread through the family that he was staying with his younger brother. No one could confirm if it was voluntary or because his wife had changed the locks. Meanwhile, Virgil told his parents the truth: he'd been in a relationship for over a year, with someone his father wouldn't approve of. Her name was Estelle, she had a child from a previous relationship, and she worked in graphic design. Harold had apparently tried to break them up multiple times. With the arranged marriage off the table, Virgil finally moved in with Estelle and her daughter. He told me later, in a short but sincere message, that he was relieved everything had come out. My father didn't contact me directly, but I knew he was asking questions through Dorcas. She told me he was spending more time in the garage lately, avoiding the phone and sitting in silence. When he did talk, it was mostly about tools or the weather. But she overheard him once, telling a neighbor that, the whole thing's a wash. Mom's tone began to change too. She stopped posting long Facebook messages about disappointment and began sharing cryptic memes about missing people who used to be close. I noticed she started following my private Instagram account again. Then I received a text from Harold. It simply said, I'm sorry for what we tried to do. I hope you'll forgive me one day. I didn't reply. Barnaby kept me grounded through all of this. He didn't press me to talk, didn't try to fix it. He just sat beside me, handed me tea when I forgot to eat, and made up silly songs about our motel sink that never drained properly. One night, as I stared at the stack of printed photos we'd been using as proof of our marriage for our apartment application, he asked quietly, what do you want to do next? I don't know, I admitted. Then we'll figure it out together. Eventually, we got a call from the leasing office. The apartment was ours. It wasn't glamorous: old tile, a door that stuck, a strange built-in shelf we couldn't quite figure out what to do with, but it was ours. We had a bed, just the frame and mattress, no headboard yet, a second-hand coffee table, and one folding chair that doubled as our nightstand. Felix brought over a box of mismatched dishes and a broken toaster he swore we could fix. Dorcas donated a rug that didn't match anything, but it made the place feel more like home. We were still living paycheck to paycheck, stretching each dollar, and relying on dollar store detergent. But we were stable. For now. Sometimes I'd catch Barnaby staring at his phone, comparing car parts or watching repair videos. Once, I walked in to find him drawing a tiny blueprint on the back of a cereal box. What's this? Our future food truck, he said with a grin. Someday. I laughed. Let's start with fixing the sink. And yet, I knew, despite everything we'd been through, that we were building something real. Not from pressure. Not from someone else's dreams. From our own. If someone had told me 3 months ago that I'd spend Thanksgiving seated at my childhood dining table again, married, unemployed, and eating overcooked carrots while my Aunt Edna talked about birdwatching, I would have laughed. Or cried. Maybe both. But that's where I found myself, shoulder to shoulder with Barnaby, holding hands under the table while the rest of my family tried to pretend things were back to normal. They weren't. Not really. But somehow, they were close. It all started a few weeks earlier. The apartment we'd moved into had started to feel like a home. We found a barely used couch on a neighborhood site for $40. It had a weird ink stain that resembled a map of Wisconsin, but it was the most comfortable thing we owned. Barnaby fixed the toaster Felix gave us, and we used it to make grilled cheese sandwiches for dinner 3 nights in a row. We finally got a small dining table with wobbly legs and 2 mismatched chairs. Dorcas visited often. She'd bring leftovers from home, containers of stew, chopped vegetables, cookies Mom still pretended were for the church bake sale. I knew she was reporting back to my parents. But I didn't mind. It felt like Mom was trying to reach out, in her own quiet way. And then one evening, I got a message. It was from her. "Would you like to get coffee?" I stared at the text for nearly half an hour. Not because I didn't want to say yes, but because I didn't know how to say yes. There was still so much hurt between us, words that couldn't be unsaid, choices that couldn't be undone. But eventually, I replied. We met at the small diner near the courthouse, the same one where Barnaby and I had split fries after our 10-minute wedding. Mom was already there when I arrived, sitting in a booth by the window, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. She looked tired. Her makeup was smudged at the corners of her eyes like she'd been crying in the car. We talked. Not about weddings or business or who was right and who was wrong. We talked about childhood memories, about Grandma's apple pie recipe, about the weird way Dad organizes the garage. She asked about our apartment, our meals, our jobs. I answered everything honestly. At one point, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "I found this while going through the house," she said softly. "It's for you." Inside was a black and white photo of me as a toddler, dressed in an oversized sun hat, sitting in Dad's old truck. On the back, in her handwriting, was a note, "For Eudora. May she always find her own road." I think that was the moment something shifted. Not long after, Dorcas told me Dad had started texting Barnaby. At first, it was just short messages, links to car part sales or oil change coupons. Then a video about replacing windshield wipers. Then a PDF on budgeting. Dad still didn't reach out to me directly, but he seemed to have accepted that Barnaby was part of my life, and maybe even respected him a little. Harold, on the other hand, had vanished from the family scene. His wife filed for divorce. Virgil and Estelle had moved into a small rental with her daughter, and rumor had it that Harold had returned to work at his brother's warehouse. Dorcas told me his house had been listed for sale. The sign out front had been bent sideways in the wind. As for us, well, things were still tight financially, but we were adjusting. Barnaby took on more delivery shifts. I got a part-time job at a small used bookstore where I spent my days alphabetizing dusty novels and recommending poetry collections to high schoolers. We were still figuring things out, but we weren't falling apart. Then came Thanksgiving. Mom had started hinting weeks earlier that we should come. Her messages were careful, never pushy. Just small things like, "Dorcas wants help with the sweet potatoes," or, "Your cousin Winston is bringing that chess set you like." Barnaby and I hesitated. But in the end, we went. We arrived a little late, hoping to avoid the awkward arrival stares. But the moment we stepped in, Dorcas rushed over and handed me a plate, whispering, "Don't look at Aunt Edna, she's already on her 3rd sherry." The table was crowded with the usual characters, relatives I hadn't seen since the engagement debacle, neighbors, and a few new faces. Barnaby squeezed my hand and found a seat between Uncle Cleve and a cousin who kept asking if he'd ever considered selling insurance. The most surprising part of the evening wasn't the food, though someone had definitely added too much nutmeg to the squash casserole, but the photo on the mantel. Right next to my 7th grade school picture, the one where I had braces and a sunflower pin in my hair, was the wedding photo of Barnaby and me, the one Felix had taken outside the courthouse. I didn't ask Mom who put it there. I didn't need to. At one point during dinner, Cousin Abel, not to be confused with Felix, stood up and announced he was engaged. Suddenly, all the attention shifted, talk of venues, cake flavors, color schemes. Mom caught my eye from across the table and smiled. Then, somehow, she winked. Progress. We left with containers of leftovers and full hearts. Back at our apartment, we reheated stuffing in the microwave and watched old cartoons on Barnaby's laptop. The ink-stained couch creaked when we sat down. The radiator hissed in the corner. Outside, the wind knocked a tree branch against the window. Barnaby turned to me, his eyes half closed. "Still think we made the right choice?" I leaned my head on his shoulder. Without a doubt. Our life didn't look like anyone else's. We didn't have matching dinnerware or a savings account large enough to plan vacations. But we had trust. We had each other. And we had peace. A few days later, Dorcas sent me a photo. Dad was in the garage, holding a new wrench set. Behind him, on the wall, was an old calendar with a note scrawled across December. Start again. I smiled. Sometimes healing doesn't come all at once. Sometimes it shows up in small, quiet gestures, a borrowed book, a car repair video, a framed photo tucked behind the glass. It turns out you can build a life with very little, as long as you build it honestly. And love, like everything worth keeping, doesn't need approval to be real. Just a little space to grow. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.